I sat quietly while they celebrated. Champagne glasses clinked. Applause rolled through the room like thunder. My aunt stood under crystal chandeliers, smiling like this night belonged to her, like it always had. People laughed, donors leaned in, cameras flashed. And me? I stayed silent. They laughed at my passion projects, smiled politely when my name came up, treated me like background noise at their biggest night. What they didn't know, not yet, was that the celebration was already over. They just hadn't felt it land. The ballroom looked exactly like money pretending to be generous. White tablecloths stretched tight, soft jazz floated just loud enough to drown uncomfortable thoughts. My aunt's foundation banner hung behind the stage in gold lettering, her name centered so big it felt permanent. This was her moment. I stood near the back, holding a drink I never planned to sip. My dress was plain on purpose, neutral colors, no sharp edges. I'd learned early in my family that standing out without permission came at a cost. When my mother finally noticed me, her smile appeared fast and thin, relief, not joy. "You made it," she said, surprised, like I'd shown up uninvited to my own bloodline. Before I could answer, she turned away to greet a donor. Her hand stayed on his arm longer than it ever stayed on mine. No introduction, no context, just absence. That was normal. In my family, worth was measured by visibility. If your name wasn't on a program, a donor wall, or whispered with admiration, you were considered between things, still figuring life out, a cautionary tale wrapped in politeness. I found my seat at a side table near the edge of the room. Distant relatives, someone's plus one scrolling her phone. No one asked what I did for work. When someone glanced my way, my mother filled the silence before I could open my mouth. "Marissa's very independent," she said gently. "She likes her passion projects." There it was, the phrase that followed me for years. Passion projects. My cousin Daniel wandered over with a drink in hand, already grinning. "So," he said, loud enough for the table to hear, "still chasing those passion projects?" A couple people laughed. Not mean, worse, comfortable. I smiled, small, controlled. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. Silence had kept me safe longer than honesty ever had. Inside, though, my chest tightened the way it always did in rooms like this. I focused on details instead, the faint scratch in the tablecloth, the smell of expensive perfume mixed with whiskey, the rhythm of forced laughter. Those details grounded me, because while they were celebrating, my mind was elsewhere. Numbers, patterns, a year's worth of work no one here knew about. I wasn't here to confront anyone. I hadn't planned to expose anything. I came because this gala wasn't just familiar, it was connected, tied into spreadsheets, vendor trails, and accounts that never quite balanced. I stayed quiet because reacting would have given them control. And then the applause started again. My aunt stepped onto the stage, soaking it in. My mother dabbed her eyes, pride spilling over. People stood, glasses lifted, the room vibrated with approval. That's when I felt it. A shift. Not loud, not dramatic, just wrong. I looked up and saw him. A man in a gray suit standing still while everyone else clapped. He wasn't smiling, wasn't watching the stage. He was looking straight at me, and he walked toward my table like he already knew my name. If you've ever been underestimated in a room full of people who thought you knew you, hit like and tell me where you're listening from. Trust me, this matters. Because when he finally spoke, when he said my name out loud, the laughter stopped. The room froze, the applause died, and my family realized all at once that I wasn't behind. I was the reason it was over. What he said next didn't just change the night, it rewrote how my family saw me forever. People like to believe silence means confusion. In my family, they treated it like confirmation. As the applause faded and the jazz slid back into the room, the night shifted into what they called networking, which really just meant everyone pretending to listen while hunting for something useful. My aunt worked the room with effortless grace, her laugh landing exactly where it needed to. My uncle followed close behind, shaking hands, nodding, absorbing attention like it was oxygen. Together, they looked untouchable. My mother watched them the way she always did, like proximity alone counted as success. No one came to my table. When someone passed close enough to notice me, my mother swooped in from wherever she'd been standing and filled the space before I could. "Marissa's in between projects right now," she'd say, her tone soft but final. She's always marched to her own drum. She said it like a warning and an excuse at the same time. I kept my smile in place. I'd perfected that skill, the kind of smile that reassures people you're not a problem. My cousin Daniel eventually wandered over, drink in hand, already loose. He leaned against the back of a chair and glanced down at me like I was a childhood photo he barely remembered. "So what are you up to these days?" he asked. Before I could answer, he chuckled. "Still chasing passion instead of a paycheck?" A few people nearby laughed, not cruelly, worse, comfortably. I shrugged lightly. "Something like that." Daniel nodded, satisfied. In his mind, the story was settled. I was the example my parents used when they wanted to scare him straight. Don't end up like her. That thought carried me backward, the way moments like this always did. There was the fundraiser last year I wasn't invited to because it would have been too technical for me. The holiday barbecue where my uncle, half joking, half serious, said I was too smart to make money. The phone call where my mother suggested I apply for something stable, maybe government, because I liked numbers so much. None of them had ever asked what I actually did, because if they had, they would have had to stop talking. I wasn't lost. I wasn't experimenting. I wasn't waiting to be rescued. I was a forensic auditor. I followed numbers that people buried on purpose, shell companies layered so deep they felt abstract. Funds moved just far enough to look accidental, patterns that didn't scream, they whispered, and if you didn't slow down enough to listen, you missed everything. The irony wasn't lost on me. The one thing my family criticized most, my quiet, was the exact reason I was good at what I did. As my aunt made her way from group to group, people congratulated her on transparency, integrity, impact. Big words that floated easily when no one pressed them. My mother stood close, nodding at every compliment like she'd earned them too. I watched all of it from my seat, hands folded, posture still. I knew better than to react. Reaction fed the narrative that I was emotional, insecure, unstable. Silence, at least, belonged to me. Still, something about that night felt heavier. The way my uncle's smile lingered a second too long. The way my aunt avoided certain questions by pivoting smoothly. The way money flowed through the room without anyone mentioning where it had come from or where it went. I told myself I was overthinking. I'd trained myself to see patterns everywhere. That didn't mean they always mattered. But deep down, I knew this gala wasn't just familiar. It was connected, and I was running out of ways to pretend I didn't see it. If you've ever been labeled the quiet one in your family, hit like and drop a comment. I read every single one. Across the room, my aunts began moving toward the stage again, signaling the next part of the program. The lights dimmed slightly, conversations softened, people turned their attention forward. That's when I noticed him. A man in a gray suit, standing still while everyone else shifted. He wasn't clapping, wasn't talking. His eyes weren't on the stage. They were on me. I had no idea who he was, but the way he looked at me told me he already knew exactly who I was. I felt it before he spoke, that subtle shift in pressure, like the room had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. The man in the gray suit didn't rush. He didn't scan faces or hesitate like someone unsure of where they belonged. He walked straight toward my table with purpose, stopping just close enough that ignoring him would have been rude. "Marissa Cole?" he asked. My head lifted instantly. Yes? The word hadn't even finished leaving my mouth when my mother turned. her smile automatic and confused at the same time. "Do you know him?" she asked me, then looked at him like she was already calculating risk. "We've exchanged emails," the man said calmly. That was enough. My cousin Daniel leaned in, curiosity lighting his face. "About what?" The man paused. Not long, just long enough to matter. "Compliance," he said. The word hit like a dropped glass. My mother's hand found my forearm. Tight, too tight. "Compliance," she repeated, laughing softly. "Oh, she's very organized." The man didn't laugh. That's when my uncle noticed. He was halfway through charming a donor when his eyes caught the tension at our table. He excused himself smoothly and crossed the room, smile already forming. "Everything okay over here?" he asked, voice light, casual, like nothing in the world could touch him. "Better than okay," the man replied. "The investigation concluded this morning." My uncle's smile froze, just for a fraction of a second, but I saw it. My aunt joined us moments later, still glowing from the stage, still writing applause. "Is there a problem?" she asked, the words polished but her eyes sharp. The man reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. "I'm with the State Oversight Committee," he said evenly. "We've been reviewing several charitable organizations tied to shared vendors and overlapping accounts." Silence fell fast and heavy. "We found irregularities," he continued. "Funds that didn't move the way they were reported to." My mother's grip tightened. I felt her nails press through fabric. "But the matter is closed," he added, "because the misallocations were identified early, documented thoroughly, and corrected." My uncle swallowed. The man turned his phone so only the edge of the screen was visible to me. I recognized the layout instantly. Charts, timelines, cross-referenced accounts. "You were thorough," he said to me. "Relentless, actually." The word echoed. People nearby had stopped pretending not to listen. Glasses hovered mid-air. Conversations died unfinished. My aunt laughed too quickly. "This is some kind of mistake," she said. "We pride ourselves on transparency." "I know, that's why this mattered." My cousin whispered, "What's he talking about?" I stood slowly, not to make a scene, just because sitting suddenly felt impossible. "I didn't do anything to anyone," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I followed numbers that didn't add up." My aunt's face shifted. Confusion, then recognition, then fear. "You?" she asked quietly. "You did this?" "I did my job," I said. My uncle shook his head. "Why wouldn't you tell us?" His tone carried more panic than anger. I met his eyes. "You never asked." That sentence didn't land. It sunk. The man cleared his throat. "I'll let you get back to your event," he said politely, already stepping away. "Miss Cole, we'll be in touch." He walked off like this was any other Tuesday. Around us, the room fractured. Whispers sparked. People pretended to check phones. My mother released my arm like it had burned her. My aunt opened her mouth, then closed it. Tried again. Nothing came out. If you're still with me, hit subscribe, because this moment wasn't the explosion, it was the crack before everything gave way. I picked up my coat from the back of my chair. The movement felt final, even though no one had told me to leave. As I turned toward the exit, I caught my uncle's reflection in the glass, the confidence gone, replaced with something smaller, something scared. For the first time in my life, no one stopped me. I thought the worst part would be what they said next, but the real damage came from what they couldn't say at all. No one raised their voice. No one caused a scene. That was the part I didn't expect. The gala kept moving like nothing had happened. The band started up again. A host made a joke into the microphone that landed flat. Plates clinked. Servers moved with trained smiles. On the surface, the night tried to repair itself. But at our table, something had snapped. My aunt sat down slowly, smoothing the front of her dress like the fabric could ground her. Her eyes kept drifting toward the exit, then back to me, like she was trying to decide whether I was real or just a nightmare she hadn't woken up from yet. My uncle cleared his throat. "This is being taken out of context," he said. "Too loud, too fast. These things happen. Accounting is complicated." No one answered him. The donors nearby had gone quiet. Not awkward quiet, strategic quiet. The kind that means people are recalculating associations in real time. People who'd been laughing with my aunt minutes ago now suddenly remembered someone else across the room they needed to talk to. My mother finally spoke. "Marissa," she said softly, like she was afraid of startling me, "why wouldn't you tell us you were involved in something like this?" Involved. That word sat wrong. "I didn't think it was my place," I said. "You never wanted to know." Her mouth opened, closed. Her eyes dropped to the tablecloth. Daniel broke the silence, forcing a laugh that echoed too sharply. "Okay, let's not overreact. This is being framed like some big scandal." I looked at him. It was almost a criminal one. That shut him up. The worst part wasn't the tension, it was the way the narrative shifted instantly. They weren't talking to me anymore. They were talking around me again, just with fear added this time. Trying to decide how much distance was safe, trying to protect whatever version of themselves they still could. My aunt leaned toward my uncle and whispered something sharp. He nodded too quickly. Then she turned to me. Her voice dropped low, controlled. "You should have come to me first." I met her eyes. "I wasn't investigating you," I said. "I was following a system." "That system is my life," she snapped. "And the money came from donors who trusted you," I replied. Calm, precise. She flinched like I'd slapped her. If you've ever been blamed for telling the truth instead of the person who caused the problem, hit like and let me know in the comments. My mother reached for my hand, then hesitated, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to touch me anymore. "We could have handled this privately," she said. It was handled privately. That's why we're still standing here. That truth hurt more than yelling ever could. The band hit a louder note. Applause erupted somewhere across the room for a different speech, a different donor. Life kept moving, but our table stayed frozen in time. I felt a strange detachment settle in. Not anger, not satisfaction, clarity. I hadn't come here to expose them. I hadn't planned this moment. And yet, every choice I'd made, staying quiet, staying focused, staying invisible, had led exactly here. My uncle tried one last time to regain control. He stood, raised his glass slightly. "To family," he said, forcing a smile. "We'll sort this out." No one echoed him. That silence was brutal. I set my napkin on the table, smoothing it flat. The movement felt ceremonial, like closing a file. "I'm going to head out," I said. My aunt stared at me. "You're just leaving?" "Yes." No apology followed, no accusation, just confusion and wounded pride. As I walked away, I felt eyes on my back, not judgment this time, but uncertainty. People didn't know how to categorize me anymore. I wasn't the failure, I wasn't the joke. I was inconvenient, and that felt powerful in a way I hadn't expected. The cool night air hit me as soon as I stepped outside. I breathed deeper than I had all evening. Behind me, the music swelled again. Inside, they were already rewriting the story. I thought leaving the room would end it, but the real consequences didn't hit until the silence followed me home. The doors closed behind me with a soft, expensive click. No shouting, no footsteps chasing after me, no dramatic confrontation spilling into the street. Just silence. Outside, the night felt colder than it should have. Not bitter, clean, like the air didn't know me yet and wasn't trying to judge. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, coat half on, letting my body catch up with what had just happened. For years, I'd imagined this kind of moment ending loud, yelling, accusations, tears. I thought truth demanded noise. Instead, it followed me out quietly, like it always had. I started walking. Not fast, not slow, just forward. The sound of music and laughter faded behind me with every step, replaced by traffic hum and distant sirens. The city felt normal, indifferent. That grounded me more than anything inside that ballroom ever could. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I didn't check it. I already knew what it would be. Missed calls, messages carefully worded to regain footing, people trying to decide whether to apologize or control the narrative first. For once, I didn't feel the urge to manage their feelings. I kept walking until my feet started to ache, until the tightness in my chest loosened just enough to breathe without forcing it. I stopped under a streetlight and leaned against the cold metal of a parking sign. That's when it hit me. I wasn't shaking because I was scared. I was shaking because I was done. Done explaining. Done shrinking. Done pretending silence meant I had nothing to say. I thought about the version of me they all knew, the private one, the independent one, the one between things. That version had survived by staying out of the way, by letting other people define success, then quietly opting out of the competition. What they never understood was that my quiet wasn't emptiness, it was containment. I pulled my phone out finally. 12 missed calls, 3 voicemails, messages stacking up from family members who hadn't spoken to me in months. My mother's text sat at the top. "Please call me, we need to talk." Need. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. The old reflex kicked in, the need to smooth things over, to make everyone comfortable again, even if it cost me clarity. I locked the screen instead. If you've ever felt responsible for everyone else's comfort at the expense of your own, hit like and drop a comment. You're not weak for feeling that way. I took a cab home. The driver didn't talk. I appreciated that more than he could have known. I watched the city lights blur past the window, feeling something I hadn't expected. Relief. At my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and stood in the dark for a moment before turning on the lamp. The place was quiet, honest. No performances here, just unfinished mugs on the counter and files stacked neatly where I'd left them. I sat on the couch and let the night replay, not in flashes, but in slow, controlled detail. My aunt's face when recognition hit, my uncle's smile collapsing, my mother's hand sliding off my arm like she'd touched something dangerous. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt separate. That scared me more than anger ever could. Around midnight, my phone buzzed again. This time, a voicemail slipped through before I could silence it. My mother's voice cracked as she spoke. "Marissa, I don't understand. Why wouldn't you trust us?" I listened once, then deleted it. Trust had never been the issue. Visibility was. I went to bed later than usual, staring at the ceiling, listening to the building settle. Sleep came slow, but when it did, it was heavy and dreamless. The next morning, my inbox was full, not from family, from work. Messages flagged urgent, subject lines tight and professional, the kind that meant the story hadn't ended at the gala, it had just changed shape. I sat up, heart steady this time, because whatever came next, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't walking back into that room smaller than I left it. The emails didn't ask how I was doing. They didn't mention the gala or my aunt or the way the room had folded in on itself. They talked in bullet points, deadlines, follow-ups, risk assessments. That was the language I trusted. I sat at my kitchen table with coffee gone cold, scrolling through message after message, oversight committees looping in legal teams, requests for a clarification, quiet confirmations that what I'd flagged months ago had rippled farther than anyone expected. No praise, no drama, just motion. And that steadiness did something to me. It reminded me who I was when no one was watching. I opened my laptop and pulled up the files automatically, fingers moving without hesitation. Account flows, vendor overlaps, patterns nested inside patterns, the same work I'd done 100 times before, only now the stakes felt personal in a way I hadn't planned for. Mid-morning, my phone rang again. Mom. I let it ring out, not out of spite, out of self-preservation. I knew how that call would go. Confusion disguised as concern, questions that circled accountability without ever landing on it. A quiet hope that I'd explain things in a way that made everyone else feel better. I wasn't ready to do that anymore. Around noon, I stepped outside for air. The city moved like nothing had happened. People rushed to lunch, someone laughed too loud on a corner. Life didn't pause for family drama. That felt important. I thought about how many times my family had equated visibility with value, how they trusted applause more than process, how my aunt's entire identity was built on being seen doing good instead of doing it quietly, and how my work thrived in the shadows they avoided. By late afternoon, the emails slowed. Decisions had been made, files closed, names removed before they ever reached the press. Quiet accountability. That phrase stuck with me. Another message came in, not official, not work-related, a short note from someone I'd collaborated with months ago. You handled that with more restraint than most people would have. Respect. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Respect had never been something my family associated with me. Not because I hadn't earned it, because it didn't come with applause. If you're still listening, hit subscribe. This part of the story matters more than the reveal ever did. In the evening, my mother finally texted again. "Your aunt is devastated. She feels betrayed." I read it twice, then typed back, "Accountability isn't betrayal." I stared at the message before sending it. The old version of me would have softened it, added reassurance, apologized for discomfort. I hit send as it was. The reply didn't come. That night, I cooked dinner for one, something simple, familiar. The normalcy steadied me. I realized how much energy I'd spent over the years bracing for my family's opinions, as if they were weather instead of choices. I didn't miss that tension. Lying in bed later, I thought about how my aunt stepping down temporarily, about donors reevaluating, about my uncle scrambling to control what little narrative he had left. None of that felt like victory. It felt like gravity. Truth hadn't attacked them. It had simply stopped holding them up. And for the first time, I understood something I'd never been taught growing up. Success doesn't always look like being celebrated. Sometimes it looks like being left alone to do your work in peace. I thought the hardest part was over, until my family finally said what they really thought of me. The call came 3 days later, not from my mother, not from my aunt, from my cousin Daniel. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. Daniel didn't call unless something was already broken. Growing up, he'd always been the messenger, the one sent in to soften blows, to test reactions, to say the things everyone else was afraid to say directly. I answered on the 4th ring. "Hey," he said, exhaling like he'd been holding his breath for days. "You got a minute?" "I do," I said. There was a pause, the kind where someone is deciding whether honesty is worth the fallout. "Look," he started, "people are talking." I almost laughed. They always were. "This is different," he said. "They're saying you set her up." There it was, the accusation they'd been circling since the gala, finally landing somewhere they could point to. "I followed the numbers," I said evenly, "same as always." "You didn't have to be so quiet about it," he replied. "If you'd warned them, maybe." "Maybe what?" I cut in. "Maybe they would have hidden it better?" Silence crackled through the line. "That's not fair," he said. "No, it's accurate." He sighed. "You know how this looks, right? You disappear for years, don't explain anything, then suddenly you're the reason everything falls apart." I closed my eyes. This was it, the sentence underneath every joke, every dismissal, every sideways glance. "You think I disappeared," I said. "I think you just stopped looking." Daniel didn't answer right away. "They feel blindsided," he said finally, "like you chose strangers over family." That one hurt. Not because it was true, because it was familiar. Family, in our world, had always meant loyalty upward, protection of image, silence when things got uncomfortable. I chose integrity, I said. They just weren't used to it coming from me. He laughed weakly. You sound so calm. I am, I said. And I was. If you've ever been accused of changing just because you stopped tolerating disrespect, hit like and drop a comment. Daniel hesitated again. Can I ask you something off the record? Go ahead. Did you know it would blow back on them like this? I thought about it, about the spreadsheets, the warnings, the internal notes that had gone unanswered. I knew the truth wouldn't stay quiet forever. I didn't choose when it spoke. Another pause. I don't know where that leaves us, he admitted. I looked around my apartment. The calm, the order, the space that finally felt like mine. It leaves us honest. That's not nothing. We hung up without resolution. After the call, I sat with the weight of it. Not anger, not guilt, grief. Because the hardest part wasn't being blamed. It was realizing they'd never been curious enough to know me before judging me. Later that night, my mother finally called. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. Her voice was tired, stripped of performance. I didn't know, she said quietly. I know, I replied. I wish you'd told me. I wish you'd asked. That was all it took. No shouting, no reconciliation, just the truth hanging between us, fragile and exposed. We ended the call politely, not warmly, and somehow that felt more honest than anything we'd shared in years. I thought that conversation would break me, but what came next finally showed me who I'd become. The days after that conversation felt strangely light. Not easy, not celebratory, just lighter. I hadn't realized how much energy I'd spent apologizing for existing until I stopped doing it. For years, every interaction with my family came with an invisible disclaimer. Sorry, I'm not what you expected. Sorry, I don't fit. Sorry, I'm quiet. Once that script broke, something shifted inside me. I woke up earlier than usual, not from anxiety, but from clarity. No tight chest, no mental rehearsals for conversations I might have to survive later. Just space. I went back to my routine with intention. Work, walks, coffee at the same corner spot where the barista never asked what I did, just how I took it. There was comfort in being known without being measured. At work, the case officially closed. Final confirmations rolled in. Brief, professional, almost anticlimactic. The world didn't collapse. Systems adjusted. People adapted. I'd spent so long believing truth had to arrive like an earthquake that I'd forgotten how often it moved like weather. Slow, inevitable. I thought about my aunt often, not with anger, but with distance. She'd built her life on being seen as good, not necessarily being accountable. That wasn't villainy. It was insecurity dressed in success. Understanding that didn't excuse anything, but it let me put the weight down. One evening, I caught my reflection in a shop window, shoulders relaxed, jaw unclenched. I barely recognized myself. This version of me didn't rush to fill silence, didn't soften truths to protect egos, didn't mistake being underestimated for being powerless. If you're still here, tap subscribe, because this is the part where the story stops being about them. My mother texted occasionally, neutral updates, careful language, no demands, no accusations. We were learning a new distance, and while it hurt, it also felt honest. I realized something uncomfortable but freeing. I didn't need my family to understand me in order to respect myself. That might sound obvious to some people. For me, it was revolutionary. I thought back to the gala, to how small I'd felt walking in, how deliberate my invisibility had been. I'd mistaken survival for identity. I'd worn quiet like armor, then wondered why no one could see me. Now I understood the difference. Silence wasn't who I was, it was a tool, and I didn't need it the same way anymore. I started saying no without explanations, turning down invitations that felt performative, choosing rest over obligation. None of it dramatic, all of it intentional. People noticed, not my family, others. Colleagues reached out more directly, trust deepened, work flowed easier, respect arrived without announcement the way it always had. And for the first time, I let myself accept it. I wasn't waiting for permission anymore. I wasn't waiting to be invited into rooms that required me to shrink. I was building my own space, quiet, solid, honest. That's when it really hit me. The night at the gala hadn't destroyed anything real. It had stripped away illusions, and the version of me standing now, unbothered, grounded, clear, was someone I'd been becoming for a long time. I just hadn't noticed because I was too busy trying to be palatable. I thought this was where the story ended, until one final moment showed me what silence had actually given me. I used to think silence was something I owed people, a courtesy, a compromise, a way to keep the peace when my presence felt inconvenient. Looking back now, I see how expensive that belief was. Silence cost me years of being misunderstood. It cost me connection with people who never bothered to ask who I was beneath their assumptions. It cost me the version of myself that spoke freely without first checking whether it would make someone uncomfortable. But silence also gave me things I didn't recognize at the time. It gave me patience. It gave me precision. It gave me the ability to listen when others were too busy performing. I wouldn't be where I am without it. That contradiction took time to accept. In the weeks after everything settled, people around me began to reference the gala differently, carefully, like a story with sharp edges they didn't want to touch. Some framed it as unfortunate, others as necessary. No one said my name unless they had to. That was fine. I didn't need to be part of the legend they were rewriting. My family gatherings grew quieter, smaller, sometimes non-existent. At first, that absence felt like punishment. Then it started to feel like relief. I noticed how much easier it was to breathe without constant evaluation hanging in the air, without jokes disguised as concern, without the need to explain my choices to people who measured success with the wrong tools. I grieved, though, not loudly, not dramatically. I grieved the family I thought I had, the version of them that might have been curious instead of critical, supportive instead of performative. That grief didn't mean I was wrong. It meant I was honest. If you've ever had to mourn people who are still alive, hit like and tell me, because that kind of loss is rarely acknowledged. One afternoon, I opened an old notebook I'd kept from my early 20s, back when I still believed I had to justify myself. Page after page of goals written like arguments. If I succeed, they'll respect me. If I explain it right, they'll understand. I closed the notebook gently. Understanding wasn't a prerequisite for respect. I thought about my aunt again, not with bitterness, but with clarity. She'd built her world on optics. I'd built mine on systems. When those two collided, something had to give. It wasn't me. The most surprising part of all of this wasn't the fallout or the silence or the distance. It was the peace, the absence of needing to prove anything. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt aligned. And that alignment made everything else quieter, stronger. There's a kind of power that comes from being underestimated, from being ignored long enough to build something real without interference. I didn't plan it that way, but I won't apologize for it either. I didn't lose my voice. I learned when to use it. And when I finally did, it didn't need to shout. I thought silence was the end of the story, but it turned out to be the reason I could finally speak. I used to believe silence meant surrender. That if I didn't correct people, didn't defend myself, didn't explain my choices, then I was agreeing with the version of me they created. For years, that belief kept me small. It convinced me that being understood was something I had to earn, something that came only after enough proof, enough patience, enough sacrifice. I know better now. Silence was never surrender. It was preparation. The night of the gala didn't change who I was. It revealed who I had already become. Someone steady enough to hold the truth without weaponizing it. Someone strong enough to let consequences land where they belonged, even when they hurt people I loved. I didn't walk away from my family that night. I walked toward myself. That distinction matters. In the months that followed, life didn't magically improve. There were awkward holidays, conversations that never happened, invitations that came late or not at all. There was loss, real loss in realizing that some relationships only survive when one person stays quiet. But there was also freedom. I stopped rehearsing explanations, stopped translating my life into language meant to comfort others, stopped shrinking to make space for people who never intended to meet me halfway. I let my work speak. I let my boundaries stand. I let silence be what it was meant to be, a choice, not a punishment. And something unexpected happened. People began to treat me differently, not because they finally understood me, but because I understood myself. Confidence doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it settles in quietly, like a decision you make once and never revisit. I didn't need applause. I didn't need recognition from rooms that were never built for me. I built my own. A life where integrity mattered more than optics, where respect didn't require performance, where being unseen didn't mean being unimportant. If you're listening to this and you've ever been the one people underestimated, the quiet one, the private one, the between things one, hear me clearly. You are not invisible. You are not behind. And you are not required to explain your worth to anyone who never bothered to ask. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is let people believe the wrong story about you, right up until it no longer serves you. The truth doesn't need a stage. It needs timing. And when it arrives, it doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes with silence, the kind that finally feels like justice. If this story resonated with you, like this video. It helps more than you know. Comment where you're listening from and tell me, what room did you finally stop shrinking in? And subscribe for more real stories about quiet strength, hidden truths, and the moments that change everything. Because some stories aren't about revenge. They're about becoming.